just wanted to talk about what it's like to cover the Pope. It was 3 or 4 days of absolute chaos and madness, and definitely what I would call the yin and yang of what it's like to cover an event. It started off in New York, where I was a pool photographer. So I got the absolute best treatment, the best positions, because I was a pool guy in St. Patrick's Cathedral. It does not get any better than that. Oh, by the way, do we have any devout Catholics here? Anybody? Oh, good. I'll be careful. Or try. Not exactly what we had in mind in terms of covering the Pope, but it started several weeks early with silly Pope coverage, and this is about as silly as it gets. If you're going to do something, you ought to pray to get him sharp, but it didn't always work. So this is St. Patrick's, and this is my position. Like I said, it doesn't get any better. I'm the position right in front of the church, right in the middle of the crowd, just me. That's my platform. No one else, because I'm the pool guy, and it's just as comfy and as warm and delightful as it gets. That's about 4 rows back from the front, and you can see the middle aisle there. It's me and a TV camera, and he was real nice. He would get down low when I needed to look left, and it worked out great. I even put a GoPro behind me. You can't see it, but it's right on the corner of the rail behind me looking back into the church to just shoot some video of the whole thing. So this is as sweet as it gets. Thank God I wore a suit that day, because I'm standing there. Talk about sticking out like a sore thumb and feeling kind of pretty stupid about it, because, I mean, you've got some pretty heavy hitters there, and everybody's, it's a big deal, and there I am standing up there on a piece of wood. I felt really pretty stupid about it, but I had a suit on, so it was better. I wasn't entirely alone. After the Pope came in, a guy from the Vatican pool jumped up on the platform at the last second. "I must shoot here." And I'm like, dude, this is like, you can't. And he's asking me to move over to the left so that he'd be over there. And it was like, not if you want to live. And he's like, I don't speak English. And I'm like, yeah, you do. You are not going to be over on that side, because I'm interested in looking left and looking at the people and shooting wide and all of that. So he went off right pretty much where my bag was. And he pissed me off because he came in there at the last minute. I thought that was kind of rude. Now, I know he doesn't have much choice. He's on a pool bus or something. But at least, before the Pope gets in, climb up on there. Well, he was a video guy, and he was trying to shoot video, and I wasn't. So it just a little, kind of jump up and down a little bit. It didn't take very long for the pool guy to decide that he really didn't want to be on that platform anymore, and he left. Well, sometimes you got to do what you got to do. So, if you're going to shoot the Pope, you better find the right people in the crowd, because you have to. You make the obvious pictures, but that's fine, And then Henry shows up. How many people know Henry Kissinger here? Oh, good. I'm so proud. Okay, thank you very much. So this is one of my favorite pictures. This is just as the Pope is coming in the doors. And it's a cool picture. It looks good, but we were talking about this earlier. Nobody looks anymore. Nobody pays attention to the event. They're all recording pictures on their cell phones. They'll go home and the kid will say, "Well, how was it?" He goes, "I don't know. You got to look at the phone and find out." It's like, put the damn things down and look and remember it. And well, they don't. And that's part of the thing about photography too. We get stuck on that. People ask me, "How was the World Series?" Like, I don't know. I photographed the thing. I don't really remember much of it. So there's a kind of a danger with being a photographer and spending all that time shooting, is you tend to miss things. You see things in a narrow cone through your camera, and you don't necessarily get the yin and the yang and the gestalt of the thing. But anyway, he did show up, and everybody pulled their cell phones out. You'll notice one theme in most of these pictures: the same guys are behind him everywhere, and they're not very happy. They're generally his security guys, like the big bald guy to the left who's really unhappy. He's a security guy. The guy right behind the Pope, that's the translator. He's in just about every frame I have. And the other ugly guys there, they're all security guys. The guy on the far right edge, they're in just about every frame I have. But the Pope was happy because he was. And more of that. And, a little godlike, because, even the atheist Jew from New York kind of gets a little luck sometimes, because whatever. I know it's not supposed to work that way, but all right, anyway. And, talk about having a good spot. This is pretty damn good. They just refurbished St. Pat's, and it looks gorgeous. And the Pope looked cool, and everybody's got their cell phones out. There was myself, there was another photographer behind the who's-he what's-this that holds all the stuff on the right. I don't know. And somebody up in the choir loft, and then somebody on the ground below. That was it, 4 photographers. And a quick pool who got to walk in quickly, take a few pictures, and leave. That was about it. So it was pretty special. And of course, he has to do his beanie stuff, and the ubiquitous television pool on the right. And of course, the Pope's there. He's got to make a speech. So he makes a speech. He makes it in Italian. No, in Spanish. I'm sorry, in Spanish, which very few people spoke. And so they had to translate. I don't know, you come to the U.S., you ought to speak in English, which you can, but he didn't. And he was very pleased with himself, as were we. And so was the Cardinal. Cardinal was very pleased. And then it's time to go. Now, this cracks me up. You got the same ugly guys and the same collection around there, and he's going around to shake everybody's hand. Look at the priest with a cell phone. And I'm trying to figure out what he's taking a picture of, because it's not the Pope. Well, I guess, but he's shooting it vertically, and he missed. That's one of my favorite. He was happy, and with his translator. Here's a case if I can't make up my mind which one I like better, so we'll show them both. And it's time to go. Now, this is semi-interesting, at least to me. He was leaving, and I shot it wide just because I thought, we should get what I was trying to do earlier, get the Pope in the sea of everybody. But what's going on here, down in the very bottom, and I don't know if you can see, there's Governor Cuomo of New York and his girlfriend, Sandra Lee of the Cooking Channel. Well, first of all, they're not married. They live together. So I'm thinking the Pope, maybe he had an issue with it. But I guess not. But she's ill. So the Pope's blessing her and putting his hand on her forehead, which would have been a heck of a picture if I had the 400 up like I should have. But I chose this time to make a nice wide picture and completely missed what was a pretty important picture. So if there's a lesson, the lesson is sometimes stuff happens and there's much you can do about it. Then we were on to Philadelphia, which, as good as New York was, and speaking of the yin and the yang, New York was the ecstasy and Philly was the agony. First of all, they shut the city down and they put a cordon around the entire city. That meant that after 10 o'clock at night on Friday night, you could not drive a car into the city of Philadelphia. Now, I was supposed to cover 2 other events in New York City, and I would have had to have arrived at Philly long after they shut the cordon off. That meant that you couldn't drive in. Now, we call them and we say, hey, we're pressed, we should be able to do that. And they went, well, sorry. So they said, take the train, there'll be plenty of cabs. Well, I knew that wasn't going to happen. So I said, I'm just going to blow off Ground Zero and the Madison Square Garden. I'm going to go to Philly in advance, and I'm going to get my car in there, and I'm going to be able to do what I have to do. The best thing that ever happened. Colleagues of mine that didn't do that showed up at Philly's 30th Street station, and there were no cabs, and they had to walk 3.5 miles with all their gear and all their clothes. And one young lady said she cried every half a block from the train station to her hotel. She would walk a half a block, and she'd stop and cry, and everybody would ignore her. And then she'd patch up her hand that was bleeding, and then she'd walk another half a block and do the same thing again. And by the time she got to the hotel, she was completely wigged out and exhausted and crying and terrible. And I was like, yeah, I kind of guess that might happen. This is at the main mass point on the parkway in the middle of Philly. And the Pope is greeting the thousands of fans, as is Bryan Communications, the PR firm. Now, why do we need to have the PR firm have their name out front in front of all of this? I have no idea. There were a fair amount of people, not as many as in Kansas City yesterday, apparently, but they did fill up the mall, and it was pretty cool. And the usual and obvious pictures. It's starting to get dark. Now, we were in a riser and waiting for this totally cool picture of the Pope in the Popemobile riding through a sea of people just like this, except it's starting to get really dark. And we're starting to think, well, shit, what are we going to do? It's getting dark, and there's no street light there, and this picture that we've been sitting there all day is just going to go to hell and, well, I guess couldn't go to hell, it's the Pope, but whatever. It's not going to work out the way we want it to, except they lit the Popemobile. They had fluorescent lights in the ceiling of the Popemobile. And this thing, it started to pull up, and we saw it, and we were like, thank you, Lord. Well, I shouldn't. Sorry, Catholics. I keep blaspheming, but we were really quite pleased. And it made really cool pictures of the Pope all lit up and going through the stands, and that was a lot of fun. However, as blissful as New York was, this was our photo position. That's the stage. This is 1,200 millimeters and blow it up. That far. This is a wide-angle shot, but if you look at all the blue in there, those are all seats. There were about, 75, 100 rows of seats in there. That's how far away we are. That stage is huge. So we all had 600 millimeter lenses, extenders, and then blow the heck out of the pictures, just to get a reasonable photograph. We also had riser spots. You can see them taped off. We were, in theory, we had paid $1,500 for a riser spot, a Ethernet line, and power. When we got there, that didn't exist. Some people had it. That's the AP to the left, and right there sitting, kneeling down is the Philadelphia Daily News. They all had what they paid for it. For some reason, we didn't. One of the things that you should think about is making friends. If you're nice to people and you're friendly with people, they tend to be friendly back. So my friends at the Philadelphia Daily News, the guy squatting down there and his colleagues, were like, well, don't worry about you don't have a spot. We got plenty of room. We have a router and you can plug in. We got power. Just squeeze in with us, which is a really beautiful thing. And that saved my butt because without that, we didn't have any pictures. So be nice to people. People will be nice back to you. You do not need to screw people. So here's a case of pay attention. Everybody at this concert was waiting for moments. I don't even remember what the moments were supposed to be. But whatever they were, it wasn't supposed to be this. But if you're paying attention and you're working and you're not having a hot dog, you'll notice that sometimes things just work out. And I saw these dancers come out, and I thought, well, that's going to be a fun picture with the Pope back there. And I didn't realize he'd be giving quite the look he was. But, it was fun. And then they have Aretha Franklin, and she sang for about 2.5 or 3 hours, or at least it felt like it. And the only person pleased with Aretha that day was Aretha. But the Pope wasn't, and neither was anybody else in the crowd. She got like 3 people to applaud. I love Aretha Franklin, but not that time. And then the Pope's got to make a speech, of course, because, he's got to make a speech. This has got to be at least like 2,400 millimeters. That's how much. This, you can see it's blown up like crazy. And, that's a 6 with an extender. And if you're going to shoot the Pope in a crowd, find a nun. And then you get Andrea Bocelli, who goes out there and sings in front of a cross and makes this beautiful photograph, but, whatever. Then Pope says goodbye, because he always does that. I think, if I remember correctly, they had this goofiest security system. In order to cover any event, you can only cover one a day. You had to go to the convention center 3 hours before you wanted to take a bus. And you had to be on a bus about 6 hours before the event. So this thing started at 6:30 at night, I believe, and I had to leave at 10 o'clock in the morning to go to the convention center to go through security and get swept by the Secret Service and all that. They did that from there. Then you get on a bus and go there. It took 5.5, 6 hours just to get there, and then you had to sit there all day. Again, the yin and the yang. This is where we get to photograph the Pope in prison. So now, instead of 1,200 millimeters, this is a 14 millimeter shot. I'm, 15 feet from him here in a tiny little room, which is totally cool, except it's kind of boring. The prisoners are all in their seats, and he's up there on his nice chair that he was very pleased with, that it was donated. And then he's not so pleased, waiting around. And then, we're just looking for things because, they're prisoners, so trying to make a picture, but so far nothing's really going on. And then the Pope goes out and he greets every single prisoner individually. This is 14 millimeters right in front of me. I mean, I could, reach out and smack him in the head if I wanted to. Last night, he's 12 miles away. I could barely see the guy. And now he's right in front of me. And it's pretty cool. He's shaking hands, and we waited for the guy in the wheelchair because it's cool. I'm thinking, yeah, I got a pretty good picture. I'm pretty happy with this. But it gets better. He starts to, get warm moments with him, and the pictures are getting a little better and a little better. And this is the point where a colleague of mine from the New York Times, he's a pool photographer today, and his job was to go into a private room and get some incredibly boring photograph of the Pope shaking hands with the administrators of the jail. That meant he had to leave the room when the pictures were starting to get real good, and he was not very happy about that. So sometimes being in the pool is not necessarily the best event. So he left, and all of a sudden the Pope gets together with his correction officer, who then kisses his hand. He told me that he researched it on Google and found that kissing the Pope's ring was an okay thing to do. Anyway, the pictures started to get better. The Pope's greeting more prisoners. It's getting more meaningful. And then he meets this one guy, and this one guy says, well, what the heck, I'm just going to give the Pope a hug. And I don't know if that's legal. I guess he figured, what are they going to do, shoot me, lock me up? You're going to throw me in jail? I'm already in jail. What are they going to do? So he hugs the Pope and makes this totally sweet picture. And the Pope looks at him with a big smile and puts his hand on him and blesses him, so I guess he figured it was all right to do that. And then in this frame, like he does everywhere, he gives everybody a big smile and waves goodbye. And the prisoners give him a big wave back. And then and it's time to leave. And unlike the rest of my trip where we had to walk everywhere and fight people telling me you can't go here, you can't go there, this time we had an escort. And the cops took us from the jail back into the city by motorcycle. And I was extremely pleased at that.